Okay, I think we are live everywhere. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to be um, waiting maybe for 30 seconds or so for people to find me in the different places that I'm going live so that they can actually come in and join. If you join me and if you're here, let me know. We are going to be talking about gardening in your classrooms. And gardening in your classroom series of workshop, which is going to be 5 sessions starting today all the way to Friday. I'm going to be talking about this topic, sharing a lot of my expertise and sharing a lot about different tips and tricks that would make your life easier when you're doing gardening in your classrooms as elementary teachers during this series of free workshops. And if you are here through the registration, if you're watching on the registration page, or you have registered for the class, that's awesome. Welcome. If you're stumbling upon this on social media somewhere, because this is a free class and it is for everybody, I do encourage you to go ahead and register for the class. Let me put the registration link right here. So if you go to my website, it's kidsgrowingcity.ca/garden in a classroom, and there's dashes in between. If you go there, you're going to be able to actually register for the class. You can follow us. You can follow us throughout the week, and you can watch and you can learn with us. But if you haven't registered, you're not going to be receiving the workbooks, the slide decks, the giveaways aren't going to be for you. So I really do encourage you to actually go and register for the class. Okay, so let me know that you're here. So I'm using StreamYard, which is a system that hopefully is supposed to gather all the comments that come in the different platforms and show them all to me over here. It usually works well. But if for whatever the reason it didn't or anything, I'm going to be, after this class, I'm going to be going through the comments on all the platforms and answer your questions and all that. But make sure that you actually do, if you can, put a comment anywhere that you are so that we make sure that this is working. That would be great. Let me know that you're here. Let me know where you're from, and let me know that which grade you teach and all of that, and that would be amazing. Again, if you are not registered for the class, make sure that you register, that the link is there, and we are going to get started. Okay, so let me share my screen. Let me take the banner off and go and share my presentation with you so that we can actually get started on this. Okay, and let's make sure that I have the comments right here so that if you comment, then I can see your comments. All right, okay, so let's get started, everybody. And if you're also, sorry, if you're watching on the replay later, welcome to you as well. I know that teachers are very busy and not everybody can attend all of these 5 sessions live, and that's totally okay. Another reason you might want to register is that all of these recordings, all of these sessions will be recorded, and they will all be on one registration page for the registrants. So that would be another reason that you might want to make sure that you actually go ahead and register for the class. Okay, so let's get started. I hope that you all see my screen, my presentation deck. Comment in the comments so that I make sure that I am sure that you can hear me, you can see me. Okay, great. I can see some comments coming through. Hello, everybody. Yes, you can all hear me. Can you also see the presentation, the slide? Okay, good, good. Let's get started. Let's get started on this. Okay, we have actually a lot to cover. Okay, so what's happening is that every day, as I just quickly mentioned, I'm going live on 6 p.m. Eastern time this week. All of these are going to be recorded. And as I mentioned, please register if you're not registered. I'm not going to take a lot of your time on that anymore. We already talked about that. I'm going to try to keep these short and sweet, hopefully half an hour, at least for the information part that I'm sharing with you. But I'm going to be here if you had questions, and I'm going to stay with you for as long as you want on all of these days, all of these sessions. This is my main focus this week, to share and share and share and share, so that you can get started in your classrooms. Please participate if you're live with me. Comment, ask questions as we're going through these. If you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, there are places that you can comment from. And if you're on the registration page and there's no place to comment, and you don't want to publicly comment or ask questions, you can always email me. This is my email address, leilam@kidsgrowingcity.ca. I'm here for you this week, all week. I'm here for you. I'm here for you to answer any questions you may have regarding growing gardens in your classroom and gardening in your classroom. So please don't hesitate and don't hold back, okay? Okay, so why are we here and why are we all interested in gardening? Obviously, gardening has lots of pedagogical benefits. It's an amazing thing to have in the classroom. But one thing that I would like to really focus on is hope and believing in tomorrow, especially after the COVID and the last 2 years. Most of the school gardens were actually not happening very well because schools were shut down on and off, on and off. We haven't been able to run our programs for 2 years. And the general feel of COVID is obviously not very pleasant. A lot of mental health issues are coming up and all that. The gardens help with that. So I would like to start with this quote from Audrey Hepburn, who said, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." And that is so true, especially when we're working with younger kids. Just believing that growing in the classroom is going to build a better tomorrow is what I want to actually start this presentation with. Okay, so gardening in your classroom agenda, as you might have seen it in the emails and places if you've registered. So today we're going to talk about logistics of the classroom garden, and the focus of today is going to be spaces. So how do you utilize the space in the classroom to do this work? Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about supplies and tools. And then the third session is going to be all about managing your time in a classroom garden, how to use your time. I have tons that I'm sharing with you, and I'm very excited about that session. Then we're going to be talking about what to do, what to teach in a classroom garden. And on the last day, which is going to be on Friday, we're going to be reviewing what we learned so far. And there's going to be a Q&A if you have any questions, or if you send me questions throughout the week by email. If you can't be here live on Friday for whatever the reason, I'm going to be, gathering those questions, and I'm going to be having a Q&A session. You can ask me live, but if you send me, I'm going to answer them as well on Friday. I'm going to have a giveaway. I'm going to be giving away some of my lesson plans, which are very dear to me, and they're very, very helpful. And I am already excited for those who are going to be receiving the giveaway. And I'm going to also talk about, as I mentioned, about Oasis Classroom, which is our paid program. And we're going to be opening doors to that program on Monday next week. Okay, so that's the agenda very quickly. So who am I and why should you be even listening to me? My name is Leila Mireskandari. I've been growing school gardens and classroom gardens since 2013. I was actually a software developer before that, and I saw the need as a concerned mother, because my now 18-year-old back then was not learning at all about good food and about the power that she could have in growing her own food. And there was absolutely no greenery even in her classroom, and she was going to a private school back then, and the private school did not even have a big land. Or so a lot of Ontario schools are actually at least lucky to have a little bit of a grass or a few trees here and there. But back then my daughter didn't even have that. So as a concerned mother, and as somebody who's been actually growing food for myself at home, I saw the gap, and I started teaching programs in schools. I have a master's degree in environmental studies, and with the environmental education diploma, my research was actually on the topic of obstacles and solutions in the way of school gardening. My master's degree research program was all about that. Before COVID, you might have heard about Kids Growing City programs in Ontario schools. If you're from Ontario, especially if you're from the Greater Toronto area, we actually built 15 school gardens in Ontario schools, in Greater Toronto area schools, in 2019, through our in-school curriculum connected programs. So my facilitators who are trained for this would go to schools and run these programs. And these pictures that you see are just two examples of the type of gardens that we used to grow with the educators. And obviously we all know what happened. After COVID, a lot of school gardens unfortunately got a lot. The first year was the worst. Anyway, we don't want to go back there, because this is not about that. This is about moving forward and looking into the future, and growing gardens, because we want to be hopeful and we want to be moving forward from all of this. Another project that we have, which is not for schools, but it is for parents at home, is we actually built a subscription box of gardening for kids at home. So that's another very successful program that we had, especially after COVID. We were able to focus on that. And Oasis Classroom, which we're opening the doors to on Monday, is another program that we are coming up with, and that is all about growing in the classroom. Now, why am I giving you my resume, right? Here's the thing. I hope that you're somebody who knows the value of other people's expertise. And what is an expertise? What is expertise? It comes from studies, research, which I have under my belt, but it also comes from focused experience for almost a decade. Like it is, I have studied this, I have looked into other people's work, I have researched this in the schools, I have been building for almost a decade. Well, minus the two COVID years, but I've been actually growing food with kids at their homes during COVID years too. So I've been doing this, living and breathing school gardens and kids gardens in general for years and years and years. It's my focus. It's the only thing that I do, and that makes me an expert. Now, I don't say that to impress you. I say that to impress upon you, because I want you to learn here, and I want you to be paying attention. So are you somebody who knows the value of somebody else's expertise? If you're here and if you're watching, that is you. And I appreciate you and thank you very much for being here and watching this and wanting to learn from this. What's shared here comes from that. Comes from focus, comes from knowledge, and comes from experience, and comes from making mistakes many, many, many times in schools, and comes from correcting those mistakes, developing programs, testing it, trying it, getting feedback from teachers, fine-tuning it for years and years and years and years, right? So what's shared with you here is very valuable. Even though this is a free workshop, doesn't mean it's not valuable. So I want you to please, please, please pay attention so that you can actually do something with this. So if you do know the value of other people's expertise, please pay attention here. Please, if you hear something that's unfamiliar, and sometimes it goes against what you have been used to hearing about growing gardens and growing school gardens, growing classroom gardens, keep an open mind, please. It comes from expertise. It comes from seeing it, trying it, being there in the trenches with the teachers, with the students, and making the mistakes and all of that. It comes from that. So please keep an open mind. And if you hear something that is familiar and you feel like, oh, yeah, I already know that, please don't dismiss it by telling yourself, oh, I already knew that, because common knowledge is not common practice. Just because you know something doesn't mean that you're going to actually put it into practice and you're going to actually do it. And what I want, and I put that in quotes because I heard this somewhere, the common knowledge is not common practice, but I couldn't remember where I got it from. So, but anyway, it is so true. Just because we know something doesn't mean that we do it. Just because we know that we should exercise doesn't mean that we're going to exercise. Just because we know that we have to, do or don't do a lot of things, that it's good for us or bad for us, that it's good for our students or bad for our students, doesn't mean we're not going to do it or we're going to do it. Okay, so please pay attention. And what I want you to take out of this here is for you to please put it into action. I want these series of sessions. The reason I'm sharing all of this information this week with you for free is for you to take it and get inspired and get it into action. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you pay attention, unless you have an open mind, and unless you have the intention to actually believe what I'm telling you to do or not to do, and actually put it into action. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why classroom gardens. Aren't outdoor school gardens better? Well, outdoor school gardens are better in a lot of ways, but they do have a lot more obstacles. Believe me, I have researched this and I've worked with schools on this than indoor garden classrooms. Also, gardening has to start in the classroom. My years of experience tells me this, for two main reasons. First of all, in the North America, especially here in Ontario and in the GTA, we have very long winters and we have a very short growing season. So season extension is one of the main reasons that we do want to make sure that we start in the classroom. But pedagogically, when you look at gardening in the school in any way or manner, a school garden or a classroom garden is a learning tool. And a learning tool means that it is not about growing food. It's a school garden, it's a classroom garden. It's not just about growing food for the community. It's about learning and teaching. It's a teaching tool. And teaching about growing your own food and gardening starts with seeds. Because have in mind that, can you imagine? I just want you to imagine how much just the topic of seeds, germination, the water that's required for that, the soil that's required for that, the amount of sunlight that's required for that, the timing of it, which has with equinoxes and all of that, how much of all of that actually is connected to science, social studies, math, even language, a lot of that. Okay, so so now imagine that versus just going out there and buying a bunch of seedlings and just putting them in the garden with your students. You can imagine and you can see how much of the opportunity of learning and teaching is completely missed and lost there. So we do want to start with growing from seed and growing seedlings to teach our students how to grow their own food and gardening in general. Now, a classroom garden is easily extendable to growing at home in cases of in-person learning and school shutdowns. We've been seeing that many times before throughout the last 2 years. We still don't know if we're going to get shut down and sent back home or not. We're just coming, like at least where I live, we're just coming back from online learning. And if we want to grow in outdoors in the garden, we cannot necessarily continue that program. And the last 2 years have shown us that we cannot necessarily continue that program easily if our program and the teaching and learning is connected to the physical space of a school garden outside, and it depends on the in-person learning. And a classroom garden is much more easier, extendable to online learning, because you can whatever you can do in your classroom, your students, as long as they have the supplies, you just give them the supplies to take home, and they can do that. They can continue that at home. It's a lot easier extendable, and it's also extendable to a school garden, because you have to start with the seeds and seedlings in your classroom, especially in places that are cold like here. And then those, if we are online, if you're not online, if you're in person, and you have grown plenty of strong seedlings in your classroom, and your students have learned a lot during that, then you can, of course, if you have the garden, you can also plant it in the garden. So it's not that if we focus on classroom gardening, we cannot have a school garden outside, or we cannot have a community garden outside. We can, if the opportunity shows itself. But if we focus on, and if we put our only focus on growing a school garden and not take advantage of the classroom gardening part of it, that should come first, then we might miss out completely on having this activity in our classrooms because of all the uncertainties that are happening. And that's not what I want for you or for any teacher who's excited about this. Now, another really good benefit is that classroom gardens do not need schools garden. They do not need space outside. So there are no approvals that you need to that you need to take. It's your classroom, and as far as I know, you can do whatever you want within your classroom, and you can have a classroom garden, which is a learning tool in your classroom. There is no worries about summer maintenance. Yes, all of these concerns do have solutions, and my school garden programs would used to come with all the solutions to these concerns. But these are very valid concerns that if you're doing a classroom gardening, you wouldn't need to worry about. You wouldn't need to worry about if to organize volunteers for the summertime. You don't need to worry about did they come, did they use the water or not, which would ruin your summer vacation. And all of that. You wouldn't need to worry about vandalism. You wouldn't need to worry about contamination of any sort. Is the soil that we're growing in clean or not? Are animals coming and contaminating it or not? None of that, right? Which makes it a whole lot easier, which makes it easy for you to actually focus on the teaching and on the learning and on your students and on the experience, instead of worrying and running around for approvals and things like that. Now, what about the community connections that an outdoor school garden would create? There is no doubt that if we could have an outdoor school garden, we should. There are a lot of community-related connections that an outdoor garden actually does create for us, and we do want to have all of that. But that doesn't mean that a classroom garden cannot be connected to the community. It can very well be connected, because imagine the ample amount of seedlings that you can grow indoors in your school, in your classroom, or another space. We're going to talk about space in detail here. You can donate them to your community. You can give them away. You can have contests and things like that and give them away. You can have a market. You can actually have an entrepreneurial connection to selling all those seedlings. If you do have a garden, obviously you can plant some in the garden. You can harvest. There is harvest that also happen in a classroom garden. Not all harvest. Yes, we probably can have tomatoes in a classroom garden with the actual fruit on it. But we can have the seedlings and we can sell the seedlings. We can give away the seedlings. We can actually plant them in a community garden and for the students to actually be involved in that as well. But there are short maturing plants, things like leaf lettuce and arugula and spinach and radishes and things like that, that you can actually harvest at the end of the spring, and all planted in your indoor classroom. So they can be harvest, and they can be cooking programs. It can be connected to many different things that connects your classroom garden to the community as well. So yeah, I just want you to see the opportunity, minus of the worries that a classroom garden, it just simplifies your life much. Now, what do you need? So let's talk about the logistics of a classroom gardening. What do you need for a classroom garden? You need supplies and tools, and we are going to talk about supplies and tools tomorrow. So the entire session tomorrow is going to be about supplies and tools for classroom gardening. You need space, and you need space for, well, which is the focus of this session. So I'm going to talk about space today. You need two types of space for your activity and for your garden station. You need you need time, and you need to know how to manage your time in your classroom garden. We're going to talk about that on another day. And you need to know what to do and how to do it, and as well as what to teach. So if you know what you're teaching, if you know how to manage your time, you have the space and supplies and tools, you're good to go. Essentially, it's as simple as that. Versus if you want to have a school garden, then you would need to do a lot more extra on top of that. You need to, make sure that it's maintained well. You need volunteers. You need um, to organize them. You need to make sure that the hose and watering system is set up properly. You need to have approvals for the space, blah blah blah, etc etc. All of those you don't need to worry about. The classroom garden just needs the tools and supplies, which are a lot simpler and a lot less tools and supplies that you would need actually for a school garden. It needs space, indoor space, it needs your time, and it needs the know-how. And we are going to cover all of those actually this week. And today we're going to focus on the space. Now, as I mentioned, just give me a second. Excuse me. So you need two types of spaces for your now, we're not talking about places, we're talking about spaces. A space can be partly online and distributed in your students' homes. It can be, that space can be held in a place called physical classroom. It can be your own classroom, or it can be another teacher, like a co-teacher classroom. It can be any type of space, and we're going to talk about that in your school physically. It can be virtually and plus physically in your students' homes. So it's a space that we're talking about. So you need a space to do your gardening activities, and let's focus on in-person learning for a second. So, and your classroom essentially usually is probably the best space for that type of thing. So for actually growing the gardens, because you want to be teaching your curriculum, connecting it to math and science, and especially social studies and language and all of that, while you're actually growing the garden with your students. So your classroom is the best place for that. And you also need a carrying station, I call them, an indoor carrying station. So your own classroom might or might not be the best place for your carrying station. And we're going to talk about the requirements of your carrying station. I have, like all of these years, I've found most classrooms, even the ones that you can see in this picture that has a very, very small window. This classroom had a few of these very small windows. As long as it's oriented towards the sun properly, and we're going to talk about that, then you can have that in your own classroom as well. Now, what your growing space needs. Now, so your growing space is the first type of space. This is the first category. You do need tables and chairs, and that's why your classroom is probably the best place for it, because there's tables and chairs. You're going to need water access. So if your classroom has a sink and water is right there, you're good to go. You're set to go. Perfect. But even if your classroom doesn't have that, as long as you have this in mind that your space requires water while your students are doing the activities, then you're good. You just make sure that you set it up so that water is present in your space during the work. And you do need to have in mind that gardening in a classroom, since it's indoors, it is messy. It is messier than most other activities that you would be doing in your classroom. Even the messy crafts activities usually don't come close to the mess that a gardening activity could create, because we are talking soil and water and seeds and all of that, and sometimes even craft material, and it can get messy. Okay, so you have to be ready with cleaning supplies and tools and tablecloths. Tablecloths are one of the main things that I highly recommend that you prepare for your classroom, so that you have everything you need in your growing space. And that's all, essentially, that's all you need. Obviously, you need your supplies and tools, which we will talk about later in detail. But in terms of your space, you need tables and chairs, and you need to make sure water is present, and you also need to be prepared for the mess that's going to be created. Now, what does your carrying station space need? It needs, and this is, I can't emphasize this enough. I've seen so many educators making this mistake. So much hard work goes into creating the seedlings, and then this one little mistake ruins the entire thing completely. Sunlight, 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 sunlight. Sunlight is very, very important for the health of your seedlings. You do want to have a sunny window in your carrying station space. If your carrying space, and that's why I was saying maybe your own classroom might not be the best place for your carrying station. It needs to be somewhere with sunny windows. Now, here in Northern Hemisphere, if the windows of the space is oriented towards south, that's the best. Even east or even west works. You just want to make sure that your windows are not oriented towards the north. Even though north-facing windows, I mean, rooms with north-facing windows are very bright, but what you need is not brightness. What your seedlings require is direct sunlight on top of the plants, and at least 4 hours of it. So 4 to 5 hours of direct sunlight. So the space you choose for your carrying station, or growing in terms of not the act of growing, but the plants needs to grow, uh, that space needs to have windows that are oriented towards the sun for at least 4 hours of sunlight. That the sunlight needs to be actually shining on the plants. If you're facing north, even though there's a lot of brightness, the sunlight does not come in. It never comes inside the space. And most of what you're going to be growing in terms of vegetables and fruit do require at least 4 to 5 hours of sunlight for them to be growing strong. Otherwise, they're going to be leggy. We call them leggy and very, very weak. And that's not what you want for your garden. So sunlight is very important. I cannot emphasize that enough. And access to water for your carrying station is also very important, because you do need to make sure that you water your plants. We all know that. Again, common knowledge is not common practice. Everybody, every adult, especially teachers who are smart and educated, we all know plants need water, but you cannot believe how many times they haven't actually thought through the watering and how much work it could be if water is not accessible in their carrying station space. So make sure that you have that in mind when you're setting up your space. Airflow is important. It prevents diseases and also indoor pests such as things like the little fruit flies that are really, really annoying. Those are actually not going to harm your plants, but they're very annoying because it just gives us a sense of uncleanness. You don't want those around, and airflow helps with that very much so. And airflow also helps, we're not talking about wind and a lot of airflow, just regular airflow in a regular room actually does help the strength of the plants in terms of their stem and root system strength. And later on, when you're actually when whoever's planting them, if you're giving them away or if you're donating them, if you're planting them in your garden, whoever does with those plants, it actually they need to be hardened off, and the more airflow has been in the room, the less spoiled essentially those plants will be, stronger they essentially would be, and less diseases and problems you will have with your plants. So think about that when you're thinking about the indoor growing space. If you now, I had to mention this when I was talking about sunlight. If you cannot, for whatever reason at all, find any space in your school with enough windows that gets enough sunlight, you can also think about grow lights. But believe it or not, grow lights, even though you actually pay for them and they're expensive and there's expense involved with that, they're not as good as actual natural sunlight shining on your plants. So if you can find that space, I want you to go ahead and find that space. Okay. But you can also do grow lights, and we're going to talk about grow lights when we talk about tools and supplies in detail. Okay. So, and also the fourth thing about your carrying station is accessible to students. If it is not in your own classroom, because your own classroom did not have good sunlight, good sunny windows, and you chose another space that with good sunny windows for your carrying station, then you want to make sure that your students have access to it, because you do want to be able to take your students to that space at least, and I emphasize this, at least once a week. Like you want to have at least 1 hour, 1 or 2 hours a week with your growing activities, hopefully. And those plants need to be transported into this carrying space. But on top of that, you do want to bring your students to the plants so that they can observe, they can learn from it. You can have, measuring activities and all of that, counting activities, how many grew versus how many didn't grow, and all of that. A lot can happen in those sessions. You don't want to set the plants up in another space outside of your classroom and forget about them. That's the last thing you want to do. You want to use that as a learning tool, it's a teaching tool. You want to use that to learn and teach, and students' observation is a huge part of that. So you want that to be accessible to your students. So if you, for example, set up a teacher's lounge, You want to make sure that you talk to people and you let them know and you have approvals, and you let the caretaker or the building manager know. Everybody knows this is where you're placing your plants, and give them the schedule on when you're going to be bringing your students. Invite the other classrooms to bring their students. That's another good thing about having a separate having the caring station separate than your own classroom, because then without interrupting your class, other students can go and visit your plants and take a look, so you can actually share the experience, which is a better community involvement activity. But you do want that space to be accessible to students, your students and other students in the school. So have that in mind when you're setting up your caring station. Now, a few important tips, and we will be wrapping this session up. I know I promised that it'll be half an hour, but we're going a little bit over half an hour, but that's okay. I hope that that's okay. If you have to leave for whatever the reason, this is all being recorded, as I mentioned before. No worries, you can always come back to this. How do you make the most out of your space? Now, if your caring space have blinds and curtains, you want to make sure that they are always open during the day. I have seen this happen before. So the teacher found the perfect space for the caring station, and then the caretakers take the blinds down, and nobody takes the blinds or curtains off all during the day. No sunlight is shining on the plants, and it defeats the purpose. So make sure that that mistake doesn't happen in your space. Make sure that everybody knows that the blinds and curtains need to be um, taken out, so that the sunlight can actually shine on your plants during the day. Yeah, I know that a lot of schools, you have to actually close the curtains during the night and after hours, and that's totally fine. But make sure that in the morning those blinds are off and away, so that your seedlings get the sunlight that they require. Now, you do want to place your seedlings as close to the window as possible, especially during the beginning of the season, when the sun is actually um, sorry, and towards the later in the season, when the sun is actually higher in the sky and the shadows are shorter, so the sunlight that actually comes into your caring space is shorter. You want your seedlings to be closer to the window, as you can see in the picture that I have over here. Um, Especially the ones that require more sunlight, you want to put them closer to the window. And you can have also, other than the window ledge, you can have also the tables set up in front of those windows for more seedlings, because what you want to do is to plant plenty. Planting plenty is something that I really encourage you to do, and there's reasons for that, and hopefully we can talk about that at another time during this week long sessions. So now in your growing space, what I do recommend, as much as social distancing allows you to do, you want to put the tables together to create bigger working stations that you can put a tablecloth on top for the students to be around it, so that you can place the supplies such as soil and other things like that in the centers. And you don't have to attend to, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 students at once. You would have 3 or 4 working stations with these tables attached to each other with one tablecloth. And then at the end, it's going to be very easy for students to clean up after themselves by, taking the corners of the tablecloth and bringing them in, and, carefully taking it to the garbage. Nothing is going to spill, nothing is going to fall on the ground. The less workstations you have, it's going to be easier for you. And I do understand sometimes with social distancing rules and things like that, you might not be able to do that. But if you could, that's the best way to utilize your space. Now, just give me 1 second. Generally now, you want your space to make it easy for you to teach. You want it to make it easy for your students to learn. So you want your space to be conducive to flow of learning, and you want your seedlings to grow well. So you want your plants to have the sunlight, the airflow, and the water that they need, and you want your students to have access to those plants so that they can learn. And you want the space to be set up for you so that when you're teaching, you do it with ease. This is essentially these three things are the goals, and the reason behind everything that I shared with you so far, so that you can actually have easy success. And what's the best part of growing in a classroom, in my personal opinion, is the incidental learning that happens by observations that your students will make, and the connection to nature that they'll feel by being at the presence of plants and close to plants and observing the plants. So I want you to utilize your space. If the plants are in your classroom, that's perfect. And if they're not, make sure that you do put into your schedule regular visits with teaching ideas in your mind, so that you can actually do that. Your students can actually have that connection with the plants. The plants aren't, in a corner forgotten. Now, the homework for you today, if you've registered for the class, you must have received a workbook for this session. Please, if you haven't registered, by the way, you can go ahead and register. Let me put that in there again so that you can see where you can go and get registered. And if you register, then you will have the workbooks and handouts, and you would be able to participate in the giveaways and all of that. So I want you to review your notes. I'm sure that you've taken notes from this session, and review your notes. Download and print your workbook for session 1. Answer the workbook questions, and decide on one action that you will take this week that would take you one step forward, closer to the space that you need to grow a classroom garden this spring with your students in your classroom. As I mentioned before, I want this workshop to be inspiring action. So every session, I'm going to give you homework for you to select an activity, an action that you want to take now, that would, using the information that I shared during the session. So please do that, and I will see you tomorrow when we will be talking about tools and supplies for your classroom garden. Let me stop sharing. So, and that's essentially it for me today. We still have a lot to go over during the rest of the week in these free sessions, and I hope that you keep showing up and joining me and watching the replays and taking notes and taking those actions, because common knowledge is not common practice, and if you don't put it into practice, you're not going to get the benefits that you would, and your students aren't going to get the benefits of this. And that's what I want for you and for everybody. Thank you for being with me, I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.